Hi guys, Z Lady here. I want to give you a quick little recap on why I bought my car. I'm a 66-year-old grandmother, and about 3.5 years ago, I took an emergency trip to Virginia for the premature birth of my grandson. While I was there, my son took me to a drifting event where I fell madly in love with the 350Z. 4 days after I came home, I bought a 350Z. And so the build began. Before I bought my car, I wasn't into cars. I was never into cars. Cars were nothing more than a tool to get me from point A to point B, and that's all they were. Fast forward, I buy my 350Z. Now, it's a 6-speed, and I had never seen a 6-speed before, but I knew how to drive a manual. I learned on a manual. My very first car was a Volkswagen Beetle, and I learned how to drive on that car. This is my first car. And that's me. This is me. And my hairstyle hasn't changed much since then. And yes, I used to play football. It was a semi-pro women's league, and I was first string defensive end. We were actually written up in the Dallas Morning News. I kept this. This is our team. I was there when they did this article. And here's our program, except we were the Dallas-Fort Worth Shamrocks, not the Fort Worth Shamrocks. Anyway, back to the Z. So it's a 6-speed, and I'd never driven a 6-speed before. I mean, I knew how to go first, second, third, fourth, but that's as far as I knew as far as driving standards go. So I drove the car home in 4th gear, and I never got out of 4th gear. And I was on the freeway, and I hate to think about what the RPMs were on it, but in my defense, I didn't go very fast because the car scared me. As a matter of fact, my very first goal, when I got my car, my very first goal was to be able to drive my car without my knees shaking. It took a while before my knees quit shaking. I get home, I'm super excited about my car. So I call my kids up and I tell them, hey, I got this car. They thought I was joking. They didn't believe me at first. When I was talking to my son, after he finally realized I wasn't joking, he was like, okay, Mom, you need to get this, and this. So he's telling me to get mods, and I don't know any difference. So I'm like, oh, okay. So what he's telling me to get side skirts, lip, diffuser, coilovers, and a spoiler. So I'm like, okay. And then he tells me, you got to go to a meet. I'm like, a meet? What are you talking about? So my son proceeds to tell me about a meet, and what meets are, and what to expect at a meet. And I was still kind of confused, and I'm like, well, how do I find this meet thing? And he tells me to get on Facebook and find one on Facebook. Okay, well, I wasn't really into social media at that time. I had a Facebook, but it had been a really long time since I had been on Facebook. And so I was thinking to myself, well, I'll just humor him and I'll go on Facebook. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to find one of these meet things, right? So then he proceeds to tell me what to expect at a meet. And he's giving me meet etiquette instructions, if you will. And he tells me, he says, Mom, okay, it's gonna be mostly young guys there. I'm like, okay. And he says, there's gonna be a lot of profanity. I'm like, oh, okay. And he says, you don't want to be the first one there. You want to wait a little while before the meet starts, before you show up. I'm like, okay. And then he tells me, he goes, if you see a group of people standing around in a circle talking, he goes, don't interrupt them. Okay, check, don't interrupt them. So now I've got the scoop on meet etiquette. And he tells me I need to go on Facebook to find a meet. I'm like, okay, all right, whatever. Oh, he also tells me, he goes, you got to talk to somebody. I'm like, talk to somebody? I don't know anything about cars. I don't know how I'm going to talk to somebody, especially if you're telling me don't interrupt anybody if they're in a group of people. So how am I supposed to talk to somebody? And he's like, find somebody that's pulling up and just getting out of their car, and then you can walk up to them and start talking to them. I'm like, oh no. Okay, I'll see what I can do. So I get on Facebook, I'm thinking I'm not gonna be able to find a meet, right? Surely there's not a meet, this meet thing around me. Well, it just so happened that I found a meet, and it was really weird. It was kind of like a fluke, like buying my car. I didn't have to really look for it. It just kind of popped up with whatever search I put in there. And the meet happened to be about 5 minutes from where I live. Now, what are the odds of that? And it was in the evening, so I was calculating in my head. It's like, that would give me enough time to get home, change my clothes, and get there and go to this meet. And I wasn't very happy about it, but I had already promised my son that I would go to this meet thing. So I found a meet close to the house, and I decided to go to it. Now you have to understand, I'm not a night person, and it took a lot of self-discipline for me to go out at night, first of all, and to go into an environment that I'm completely unfamiliar with. Plus, I'm by myself. I'm like, holy cow, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? But I promised my son. So I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go to this meet thing and then uphold my promise to my son. And that'll be the end of that. Check that off the to-do list, right? I'm not a social person. I don't like crowds. I don't like parties. If I have to be in those kinds of environments, then I'm a wallflower. I step back and I just watch the activity that's going on. So for me to be in this environment at a meet was completely out of my comfort zone. It was the first time that I had ever seen modified cars. It was my first experience with car enthusiasts, and it was just totally overwhelming. You know, I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm with a group of people that I know nothing about. I'm seeing things that I know nothing about, and I stick out like a sore thumb because I'm an old lady in the midst of all of these young people, mostly young guys. And it was just like so overwhelming. Now I saw my first slammed car there. I mean, slammed, like to the ground, on the concrete, slammed. And I I'd never seen anything like that before. And I'm like scratching my head trying to figure out how in the world did they get that car there? Because I know they couldn't drive it. I didn't know anything about bags. I didn't know anything about airlift. I didn't know that what mods were. I didn't know that that was a thing. My car, when I went to this meet, for all intents and purposes, in my eyes, my car was stock. I later found out that it had a few mods on it, but I didn't know that. I mean, my car was exactly the way that I bought it. So it was like a stock car to me. So I just felt extremely uncomfortable in this environment. But I get up the nerve, I get out of my car and I start walking around, right? Well, at that point in time, again, I didn't know these were called mods. My son had recommended these add-ons to my car, which happened to be mods. And one of the things that I was researching at that point in time was diffusers. So because I felt so uncomfortable in the environment, what I was doing is the cars, they had their behinds backed up like this, all the way across the parking spots. So there was there was a small area in between the cars like this where I could actually walk and not be close to all the people that was out there. So what I was doing is I was going behind all these cars and looking at all the different types of diffusers. Now, again, I didn't know anything about cars. So I didn't know a diffuser that would go on, say, a Camaro wouldn't fit my 350Z. I didn't know that. But I was looking at all the diffusers just so I could be in that environment and not be too, I don't know what the word is, stand out too much. I was trying to hide, basically. Because it was so uncomfortable. Anyway, so I do that. I'm looking at diffusers and I'm looking at these cars that I'd never seen before, and some of them had lights flashing. And you know, now I know it's like underglow and headlights and that kind of stuff. But I've never been exposed to anything like that. I did muster up enough courage to go talk to one young man, and he pulled up, and his, bless his heart, I mean, his car was old. Now, it was a really cool car that he was just starting to build, but it looked like a beat up car, okay? Now, I've since learned that that's cool, he's starting his build. But at that point in time, it was like, okay, here's a beat up old car that I think I feel comfortable enough to approach this person. So I went up and I asked him about his car. He was polite enough and he talked to me for a little bit. And I was just happy when the conversation ended. And I'm like, okay, I promised my son I'd talk to somebody. I talked to somebody. Now I need to get out of here. So I think the whole time I spent at the meet was probably 45 minutes at the most. And when I left that meet, I'm like, I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing this again. But at least I can tell my son I went to the meet and I talked to somebody. So yeah, I wasn't ever going to go to another meet again after my first meet. Hey guys, if any of your grandparents, parents, or friends need a little nudge, stepping out of their comfort zone, please share this and subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and leave a comment below. Thank you.